Hey everyone, it's Ro with Ro's Wigglers coming back with another video. I wanted to follow up on my last one and try out this new tripod thing, so let me know how I'm doing. I turned my camera screen sideways like Mimi from Mimi's Worm said. Samantha, thank you. And so let's see, let's get into it. So the last video I did, I talked a little bit about some troubleshooting, thinking maybe I had set my breeder bins up to be a little too crowded. And so I got some feedback from several other really brilliant worm farmers, including Samantha from Mimi's Worms, Jane from Rockin' Worms, trying to remember your name, Nana's Worms, who I am really getting more into your videos as well. So very excited about that. And so I wanted to show you kind of where I'm at in my process and what I'm troubleshooting and what I'm noticing. So the first thing that I'll show you is this shelf of trays behind me. What I'm doing, based on what Samantha told me, is I am setting up different bins. Let me see if I can get this close enough. Let's see here. Okay, here's my hand. Different bins that have different quantities of worms. So if we start over here, this first bin, these are a little bus tub size, has 100. And then this next one has 150. This one has 200. And then I switched to the mortar tray size, and I have started with 200, and then 250, and then 300, and 350, and all the way down to 400. So my next one is going to be 450 worms. And I have been very tediously going through and looking for clitellums on each worm to make sure it's a mature worm and counting them out and putting them into the bins. So let me kind of show you my setup for how I'm doing that. Excuse my amazing videography skills. I'm getting better. So I'm going to put this thing right here so you can see. Okay, so this is sort of my setup to let you see what I got going on here. So this is what was my original bin that I had set up with 2B breeders, but I also still have a bunch of babies and stuff. This is still from those worms that I purchased from the guy over in Waterloo, Illinois. And so I'm going through, I added, you'll see a lot of extra shredded cardboard here. That is not what this originally looked like, but I added a bunch of that to get this to dry more quickly so I could go through this process. One of the things that I found was that when it was too wet, the obvious issue being if I tried to use my sifter, things would get caked up. But I also was running into so much of the bedding sticking to the worms that it was really hard for me to look at each individual worm and try to find a clitellum. And so I found that getting it to dry out a bit is really helping me in the process. And so this is the original bin. This is the bin that I'm sifting into. This is my turbo sift that I got from Worm Gear that I love. And this is the 4mm size, which is 5/32 seconds of an inch instead of like 1/4 or whatever. I think they use metric. I'm not sure. But it's a good size for, this is one of my larger trays. This is where I am throwing, this bin here is where I am throwing all of the babies and juvenile worms, which will then be going to my CFT bins to mature out and continue to make me compost because they're not doing me any good in my breeder bins. And then this bin down here is the one that I will be adding the appropriate number or my experiment number of mature breeder worms to this bin. And so what I'll do is I'll take this green tape, which means that this is a bin that has a mix of red wigglers and Indian blue worms, and I'm going to put this on my bin, just kind of like the ones that you saw on the shelf already. This one will be labeled 450 worms because that's my next increment that I'm going for. Now, based on the feedback I've gotten since I started this process, this is probably going to be a little low. Jane from Rockin' Worms, I think that she said she had 850 worms for approximately 2 square feet, something like that. That might not be exactly right, so don't quote me on it. But that tells me that my numbers are kind of running on the low side. So I just put the number 450. I'll put the date on there once I remember what the date is. And I'll get into it. So this bedding is already all set up for my breeders. It's a mixture of a little bit of shredded cardboard and paper, a little bit of compost, and some very well composted, shredded up leaves that are just very fine. Then I have some blended up eggshell in here, some azomite, and I will be adding a little bit of worm chow. One other new thing that I got from feedback from everyone, so great about the worm farming community. Everyone shares their tricks and helps you learn along the way, and it's been really amazing. But one additional thing that I got was to try feeding your breeder bins only worm chow and not food scraps, which isn't something that I have consistently done in the past. So it's something I'm trying out now. So basically what this process has looked like for me, I am not going to go through on video and count 450 worms. Sorry if that's what you were hoping for. Maybe one day if you want me to set up a video and you just want to sit and watch me count worms for way too much time, because this has been a pretty big time suck for me. But I know it's going to pay off in the long run for me to be able to dial in my systems. Maybe then I'll just make a video and I'll put this tripod up here and start counting, and that'll be the whole video. Probably not though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these gloves, because I like to use gloves when I'm doing this. I know not everybody does. Sometimes I don't. I mix it up. Put these on, and then I'm going to take a little batch from my original bin here, put it into my turbo sift. This is also the beginning stages of me harvesting a whole bunch of worm castings, because this bedding that I originally used was most of the way finished off already from the original worm farmer where I got this stuff from. So, but that also means it was full of babies and cocoons. Mixed bag. There are some real benefits here, some not so great benefits based on what I'm doing. So I sifted this down, and what I have left in this little tray here are the bigger, chunkier bits and the worms. And so now that has gotten some of that bedding out of the way, so I can come through and I can look for the worms. I'm going to grab a worm. Any of the little tiny ones that are obviously not old enough, I'm not going to mess with. But if it looks like a somewhat mature size worm, I'm going to get it. And I am going to, it almost looks like I'm trying to pet this worm. But I'm going to go and I'm going to see if it has a clitellum. Let's see here that I don't see one. So this is going to go in the bin with the juveniles to go to the CFT system. And I'm going to look and see if I can find one that has a clitellum. So, this one has a clitellum, just barely, but it's coming in here. Sorry, the lighting right here is not that great, but I promise you there is a clitellum. So that means that this is worm number 1 going into the new fresh breeder bin. And so that's number 1. Only 449 more to go. So, some of the other things, again, I'm not going to go through and count all these worms, but I want to just keep you going on the journey with me. So, some other observations that I've made that I have found interesting is when I'm going through this process, I'm noticing that I'll go through spurts where there's like almost no mature worms. There's only babies and juveniles. And I'm like looking and looking, and it's just a bunch of babies and juveniles. And then like the next round, from a different spot in the bin, will be mostly mature breeder worms. And so I'm wondering, are they like separating themselves like they do at a family reunion when all the kids hang out in the other room and the adults are doing their thing in another part of the bin? Has anybody else noticed that? Because this is kind of fascinating to me. I'm also paying attention to how many cocoons I see, and that is also similar. So in certain parts, I'm seeing lots and lots of cocoons, and in other parts, I'm not finding any cocoons. And I'm wondering, now these came out of all this bedding and all these worms that I have started to do this process with came out of some big CFT bins that I purchased from the guy in Waterloo. So that makes me wonder, is it because it's from different levels of where the worms were at in the CFT bin? Is it where the last feeding was mostly? Was there one spot that was a little more moist than the others? I don't know, but that's been a fun observation for me. Otherwise, this has been my absolute least favorite part of worm farming so far. Going through and trying to look for clitellums and count worms and not lose count, because my brain does not pay attention in that way. So it's been a little bit of an interesting journey. Hopefully, the ones that I've already counted so far are mostly accurate numbers. I'm definitely not going to go through and recount again. And then my plan is to, after 21 days, when I go to reset these bins, I'm going to look and see which ones have the most cocoons. And I think that before I switch anything up, I'm going to do at least 2 rounds of 21 days to see how accurate that number feels. And then from there, I'll start combining or dividing bins based on what population I have found works best in my context here in my basement in St. Louis, Missouri. So that's my update for you. Feel free to leave comments. Let me know what you've learned along the way in your journey. Any feedback is always great. Any advice is always great. Any questions are great. I will answer them if I have the answers. If I don't, I'll try to connect you to someone else who is maybe more experienced in certain parts of this endeavor than I am. I'm starting to find out who has the best knowledge in the different topics and wheelhouses, so that's been kind of fun to do too. Yeah, other than that, until next time, remember, healthy soil, healthy plants, happy worms. I did not do it.